Hey guys, it's Caslow, and we're back looking at some more Final Fantasy XIV Media Tour stuff. We are starting with some interviews of Yoshi-P, talking about Endwalker and kind of what to expect. I think there's some funny questions in here as well, but we're going to get started with Easy Allies and Damiani and see what he had to ask.
Last time I got to speak to you, Yoshi-P, I asked you about the possibility of bringing back a server featuring Final Fantasy XIV 1.x that would let players experience the original version of the game. You said that would be a nightmare. So this time...
Now, I wanna point out, Damiani has made it apparent that the reason for that question about a 1.0 server isn't trying to copy WoW Classic or anything. It's more of a game preservation standpoint. Because right now, if you really wanted to go back and experience that, even though it wasn't great except for the story, there's no way to do so without setting up your own private server and really doing it. So thinking from game preservation, that's the reason he kind of asked that question.
Time I wanted to ask you about the possibility of bringing back a way to play A Realm Reborn like it was when it first launched, like a 2.x server.
それもナイトメアですよね。
That's a nightmare too, though.
See, and he's clarified that's the same reason he asked that question about 2.0 here as well.
Like, I'm sure you remember, like, before we even had Raid Finder, before we even had like Party Finder, like like a forum to gather party members, like you would have to travel to Wineport and just shout, pick up group, I need a group, you know? And I can totally imagine, like, once we do release something like that, and they'd be like, yeah, we like the 2.0, but man, we want a Raid Finder, or hey, can you bring back the Party Finder forum?
悪夢ですよ。
No, that's still a nightmare. And this is something I've been consistent with, being with the
Yeah, and I wanted to... that's how I experienced raiding for the first time. Was very much hanging out in Wineport. You had to bring everybody there together so you could even queue up. And even worse, they all had to be on the same server. So you right now you can create a raid group of like people all across your data center, which makes it so much easier to find people, and it makes the need to server transfer almost non-existent. Because at this time, servers like, I believe it was Balmung, just bloated full because that's where all the good raiders went. So that there was a good population of solid raiders to play together with. And so, not having it back in the day, you really had to rely on hoping you could find some people on your server that somewhat knew what they were doing.
Do you have any plans to increase the visibility of the world first races for Savage and Ultimate going forward?
なんかやっぱりコンソール
So this is a tough one, actually, because Final Fantasy XIV, of course, is played not just on like PC, but we also have console players as well, and all of us are on this sort of Final Fantasy XIV. And then, depending on the player, sometimes we do notice that they have what appears to be like third-party tools that they're using, and so it does get to be difficult to draw that line of what is and is not fair. And of course, I totally get the sentiment of wanting to get excited about, you know, rushing to be the world first, kind of like how we would pay attention to esports and things like that. But that isn't the only element of Final Fantasy XIV at the same time. And so if we were to have some kind of like an open competition, so to speak, I feel that something that's closer to a speed run might be putting everybody on a fair, like, competitive ground. And you know, everybody will be able to sort of clear the content, and we can still have that competitive element.
Is there any update on the status of an Xbox version of Final Fantasy XIV?
まあ
So I feel bad for saying the same thing every time, but we are still in discussions with Microsoft, and I feel like our conversations are going in a positive like tone. And I don't want.
Yeah, and on the Xbox issue, I think a lot of people need to also be aware of how Microsoft requires crossplay to work. And I don't know if this has changed more recently. I think they've started to lean away from it, but originally, like, you had to use Xbox Live, and on top of that, you had to allow servers where Xbox players could only play with Xbox players. So that if they wanted to opt out of crossplay, they had the opportunity. I think they might start bending the knee a little bit on this one, just because Final Fantasy XI was really successful on Xbox 360, and it was kind of like the only game that was really crossplay on 360 that I can think of. So maybe they'll look at that and go, hey, this is an online world where everybody's in the same world, they're from different servers. There's not a competitive disadvantage that much like you have with shooters. We're going to go ahead and allow it in this limited instance.
Requested a lot from our community to ask about this. Is there any chance of getting Masayoshi Soken's rendition of Lahi from the fan festival as an orchestrion role?
No. Not everybody saw that performance at fan festival. Not everybody saw the fan festival. And imagine coming home to your free company house and the orchestrion is going and you hear that. I'm scared people are gonna freak out and cancel their account. I do not want that to happen.
Next question. There's been a lot of big name people who've been playing Final Fantasy XIV recently, including, I believe, just today or yesterday in your time, Hironobu Sakaguchi just started playing Final Fantasy XIV. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on him picking a Lalafell and picking Gladiator for his starting job.
Man, I don't know. I mean, Lalafells are adorable, so maybe that's why he chose a Lalafell, and I know he's been reaching out to Mr. Matsuno, Yasumi Matsuno, for advice. So maybe he told him, oh yeah, if you go in as a tank, your queue won't be as long and you get matched quicker. Maybe that's why he picked the Gladiator. But we will be having a talk session for over Zoom, and I haven't talked to him in a while. So yeah, it's something that I will be participating. I think Saturday on Japan time. We'll be talking about it, talking with each other for Famitsu's programming during Tokyo Game Show. But maybe that's why he had decided maybe I should at least touch up on 14 or try to see what 14's about. And I mean, I'm sure Mr. Sakaguchi is very busy, so I don't know how far he'll get into the game. He might just experience the first part of it, and he might get very busy. But I really appreciate that he is trying out the game.
I've got a note. He has already beaten Heavensward. Like, he is flying through Final Fantasy XIV, and has been singing like the praises of the storytelling in Heavensward. So maybe we'll start seeing tweets from him soon talking about the free trial for the critically acclaimed MMO Final Fantasy XIV that includes all the way up to level 60, including its first expansion, Heavensward. All right, well, that was Damiani's interview with Yoshida on behalf of Easy Allies. I think there were a couple of questions in there. We didn't get much, I don't think, but I think there were some important questions that I at least wanted to clarify for the community of why he asked certain questions as well. But let's go ahead and jump to the next one, which I believe it's either Larryzaur or it's Larryzaur. Okay.
So my first question is going to be about Summoner, of course. So I've been a Summoner main for a very, very long time, and it's changed so much throughout the years, and I believe that this is the best iteration of Summoner we've ever gotten. Could you talk about the process for designing this new Summoner? And also thank you for keeping Resurrection.
ごめんなさい。は実はもうその時点で決めていたことでした。
So with the summoner, and when it released or when the updates were implemented as of the last expansion, Shadowbringers, it was still working off of the base system that we developed during ARR, and that was kind of put together in a short amount of time, and we were feeling that it was the system was kind of reaching its limits. There was a lot of different abilities that were being added onto there. There were many dots to keep up with, so that you can continuously have them. And then some of it was starting to interfere with the global cooldown, and you'd have to manage your pet as well. And so if the response was poor, it would make for a very bad gameplay experience. And so we were already feeling the strain of the limits that we were reaching as of 5.0 release timing, and we as a development team were already thinking about, okay, this is the last time we're updating the summoner as it is right now, and we would need to rebuild summoner for 6.0.
で、改めてその新しい召喚集を作っていく。
That's interesting because that means that kind of the, for lack of a better term, Shadowbringer Summoner, at least when I played through it, had a bit of jank. And if they were looking at it going, hey, we just got to give it a quick update to get it up to level 80, and then we're going to start doing a full rework for 6.0, that kind of explains some of the choices there, too. Combined with, I think they were really focusing more on maybe some of the Scholar changes at that time that also somewhat affected Summoner.
So on top of that, we wanted to decide, okay, so with these 2 points that we want to change, how do we make it so that you're summoning a creature like you would do in a traditional Final Fantasy, but it wouldn't be too interesting if it was just, okay, summon a being and then they cast their whatever move that they make and then come back. It didn't seem as interesting an idea when we kind of translated it into Final Fantasy XIV. So an idea was brought up. So why don't we use these beings that we summon, and that affects the summoner themselves, and like the way in which they attack or the elements that are kind of infused by summoning these beings would change the way the summoner makes his next offensive move. So that was kind of like the process we were thinking about in.
Now, I find that especially funny because it reminds me of Final Fantasy XVI, because it very much looks like the main character in that is taking on some of the abilities of these different summons. It's got a big phoenix wing that he uses with a swipe attack. He's got Garuda claws at one point. It very much, it sounds like very similar of the summoner taking on the aspects of its summon.
In our foundation of the revamp.
So, with the release of Endwalker, do you feel that you've overcome most of the technical debt from 1.0? Or are there still things that are holding
his face?
And if so, do you think an engine rework would be required in the near future?
So one major point about technical debt, per se, is we don't have any sort of like technical or like a technological issue that was carried over from 1.0, because ARR was meant to kind of discard what we had with 1.0 and rebuild it from the engine.
Yeah, if anything, they've got technical debt from the PS3. And it's funny seeing people play through, for instance, Stormblood right now. I was watching Medieval Marty's videos, and he talks about just how much the presentation, just the spectacle has changed from even Heavensward. And as a player from that time, it's because, well, they dropped PS3 support, and so they could do a lot more without having to worry about it bogging down the PS3 system. So I'm interested to see if he's going to talk about maybe going back and changing some of that stuff in Heavensward and A Realm Reborn.
And so, but That being said, with ARR, we did have to build it in a very limited amount of time, and so there were some flaws. The aforementioned summoner had a base system that was kind of flawed. The buddy chocobo system was actually something that we needed to fix as well. So we would address those whenever we release an expansion pack, actually. So the buddy chocobo has been updated so that we've kind of rebuilt it. Of course, it still behaves the same, but we did need to rework that. And then the summoner's base system was pretty...
Yeah, if you didn't know, it used to be that you couldn't like queue for dungeons or roulettes with your chocobo out because like he counted as a party member, but he didn't qualify for the dungeon. And so if you wanted to like fight alongside your chocobo while doing Beast Tribe dailies while queuing for your roulettes, you couldn't. And so they had to go in and change that later.
Pretty much complete in its overhaul. And then there was also another issue that we fixed with player collision areas. There are still a few items that are left on our list. For example, this is actually going to be addressed by 6.0, but the achievement system is something that we wanted to rework. So that's going to be revamped from the UI to everything. And then we also want to work on the friend list system. That's something that we want to eventually get to. And then also the glamour plates. I know we want to address that and see if we can increase the number of slots. That's something that we want to work on. I think in the
it's what everybody cares about in the end game is having more glamour plates. Everybody wants more of that. I'm starting to hit my limit, and I don't even glamour that much. So I can only imagine how other people are doing.
X patch series and beyond. But yeah, I think with any sort of system-related updates, we try to do those in the background so that it is more efficient, so that it is more comfortable for the players. That being said, we do want to look into the next 10 years and how do we sustain the game. So like graphic system included, we do want to plan for like continuous growth as well. So
I wonder, especially since they're talking about graphics here, if they've been looking at maybe the statistics of people who are using G-Shade in-game and thinking about how can we kind of incorporate that same thing into the game system, because they do that a lot. They look and see what people are doing from third-party tools and figure out how they can incorporate it in such a way that, like, for instance, console users could use it. So I wonder if it's G-Shade that's kind of also pushing them to look at what they can do for graphics.
There are plans that are starting to be made, and I would like to go into details once Endwalker releases.
All right, well, that was Larry's interview. He said he was doing it with Miztech. I will be looking at Miztech's interview as well. But let's get on to the next one, which I believe is Mr. Happy. Yep. So we'll check out Mr. Happy's.
Some skills such as Hypercharge, Wildfire, and Blood Weapon still have tight buff windows that could be punishing if the player's connection is even slightly slower. How does the team decide which skills receive these kind of adjustments and which ones do not? So the answer is a mix of something that makes a lot of sense to something that kind of surprises me. So they said they look at a few different factors for this, including how a specific action may stress a player. For some skills, changing it to a charger status. So the part that makes sense to me is where they're talking about, analyzing how a skill may stress the player. That just makes sense, but the actual question was about the...
Yeah, because I'm not going to lie, I think I've had some moments where, like, my combo on Red Mage, my melee combo hasn't connected correctly just because I have a ping spike. And so, like, one of them just doesn't proc like it should. And that's one of those things that I think would highly stress players.
High ping and high latency stuff, and it seems to imply that they haven't received a lot of feedback in regards to Hypercharge, Wildfire, or Blood Weapon. Now my next one was a bit of a fun one. Healers in the live game discuss how often they are casting DPS spells, giving jobs like White Mage nicknames to Glare Mage instead. The Mediator build has some new healing skills and even some new damage skills. Has the team noticed or taken any feedback on improving interactivity with healers whether that be more interesting DPS skills or more prominent healing requirements. As for Yoshida's answer, kind of the expected one, but I do like to get updated perspectives now and again. Yoshida said he totally understands why high-skill players desire more technical aspects to DPSing when they're playing healer. They are able to put out damaging skills very often between the healing that's required. That being said, they won't do any sort of dramatic addition of DPS skills to healers moving forward. New players shouldn't feel this immense pressure to deal damage on healing jobs because we force them to have a bunch of damaging skills. They should get their exhilaration from improving how well they heal, then consider if they have the time to DPS. He then added a reminder that, Sage is coming out. There is a healer now with a much greater focus on dealing damage since it heals a player as well. You can also time a bear to reward a damaging spell in return, talking about the Toxicon interaction, so players looking for a more involved DPS process might enjoy Sage a bit more.
The one thing that wasn't said there that I've heard in other interviews is that the team also is trying to make healing more intensive in some of these higher level fights to take the ease off of the need for healers to DPS. Kind of pushing them more towards a focus on interactive healing. So it's weird that Yoshi-P didn't respond to that in that way here as well.
As many of you know, the Party Finder is plagued with posts advertising for sales of content or services not intended to be allowed in-game. Is the team aware of this, and are there any plans to combat it? So Yoshida had a very quick reply to this. He said, yes, they are aware of the rising number of posts in the Party Finder that advertise for activities that are not what the Party Finder is actually posted for. Basically meaning like you'll see duty roulette leveling and then it'll just have a completely different description for it. Some of these activities even exploit loopholes in the user agreement as well. So they are planning to update the user agreement so that they may deal with postings like that in the future. He said that he knows it seems like they should just enforce it now. They know about it, they could act against it, but he said that if their user agreement doesn't have clearer rules or they don't clean up these loopholes, that they would face rightful backlash from the players for being unclear about what is and isn't allowed. So they said they need to button up the user agreement before they do anything else, and they are hoping to do this soon.
Now, from a lawyer standpoint, because that is my background, I don't think he necessarily needs to put that in the user agreement. I think the user agreement is likely broad enough that they could do whatever they want. I think what this is more getting towards is a PR move of letting people kind of know that, hey, we're going to start enforcing this in the future. We want you to have a chance to stop doing it before we start enforcing it. Which is just there to keep people happy. You don't want to get banned for something that was good one day and then not bad the next, even though nobody said anything.
Why has the team left some skills, such as ley lines or Monk's new Riddle of Wind skill, on these 90-second cooldowns instead of adjusting them to 60 or 120 seconds? Yoshida gave me a very elaborate answer for this. This is done for several reasons. First, if every ability was 60 or 120 seconds, then the jobs end up feeling too similar to one another. It's nice to have some abilities that you have to consider when to use them between those big burst windows, otherwise you might just get bored. Second, if they stack too many abilities during those 60 and 120 second timings, then some jobs just get way too busy, which may cause the player some stress. As for ley lines, Yoshida said that they had to consider the impact of that skill's cooldown a lot, and they have been since Shadowbringers even. Now they said if the skill was 2 minutes for its cooldown, then the pressure to use it efficiently goes up a lot. And since you have to stay in the space in order to get the buff, they were like, black mages just might choose not to move. Even if something dangerous is happening, they might just stand there because I can't waste this ley lines. It's every 2 minutes, it's so valuable. So they decided that wasn't going to work. Then they thought about it on the flip side, which was contemplating reducing the cooldown to just a minute. And then they determined that with the effect that it has right now, that probably wasn't going to work. On top of that, trying to encourage the black mage to just halt all movement so drastically so often just wasn't a healthy design choice. Then they considered other things, like adding a trait where the ley lines follow the player, or an ability that lets you slide the ley lines to you instead of you sliding to the ley lines. But then they just said it might as well just be Enochian at that point. You might as well just roll it into that. Something you press and then you just do your rotation without any sort of consideration. You're just stronger. So with all of that in mind, they kept it at 90 seconds. It can still be used as a mobility tool. It can be used as a damage buff, and it makes the skill just more flexible overall. Now that's when I said
Now, I will say, the idea of like a buffed spell speed skill that follows you around, that could be something that ley lines could turn into in the future. Maybe like something called like hypercast or something. So that it's just it then becomes, and the timer for ley lines then becomes your own timer. It could be a really nice like high level spell in the next expansion, or skill in the next expansion, if they want to do something like that. All right, well, let's jump to the next one, which is Miztech.
So can you give us any information on the upcoming ultimate plans in Endwalker? Can players expect 2 encounters, or should they prepare themselves for just 1?
So right now we're still on track for Dragon Song. We are targeting patch 6.1 for that content. And then there is one more that we want to do, and we're trying to see how we can squeeze this in. And we've kind of thought about the general idea of what we want to do, but this information in and of itself is already like, this is a new topic now. This is more information than we should be sharing at this point. So I'm afraid this is all I can say about it.
No problem.
Now, I've heard it reported in some other interviews that he actually confirmed 2 ultimates, but a potential for a third, which is not what he responded to Miztech with. I think with Miztech, he was more trying to respond to maybe what the second one was going to be. So, I don't know. Maybe it was just a mistranslation there.
Would the dev team ever entertain delaying each Savage raid tier 1 week after its patch is released? So similar to what happens at the beginning of an expansion, but applied to each raid tier patch.
Like with each turn, right? Like whenever it comes out, the Savage.
Yes. So basically, at the beginning of the expansion, there's a week before or after that the normal mode gets released to the Savage mode being released. And that doesn't happen for future, like the 5.2, 5.4 raids. So would there ever be the chance that there would be that delay for those patches as well?
So I'm afraid I can't say one way or the other at this point, but we are trial and erroring. Basically, we are trying to see if that is feasible since like the 5.x series. And so I think once we are able to determine how we're going to move forward, we're hoping that it will kind of match like the needs and the sentiment that we've been receiving. But once we are confirmed on being able to reveal more information, I would like to take the time to explain.
Sounds good.
No, I still don't know if he got kind of what the question was there through the translation. But I know it is really nice for some people to be able to not have to worry about foregoing doing the story when it releases, because you've got to go straight into Savage with people. So having that week delay, in addition to getting a little bit more gear, the bigger thing is it leaves a lot of leeway for you to go do the story, go do the new stuff without having to rush into Savage. And there's some people I know who would absolutely love that. So I'm glad that Miztech asked him that. Hopefully it got clarified. Hopefully he understood kind of where she was asking there. But I guess only time will tell.
Good.
All right. Well, that are all the interviews I wanted to look at today. Hopefully I didn't miss too much. I'm pretty sure I'm probably going to cut out some of the questions where I didn't have anything to say. I encourage you to go check out each of these individuals' channels and their videos, because there are more questions than what I have in my video. But if you liked this reaction and want to see more, let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, be sure to click subscribe. You'll get to see all my videos as they come out, which will include a lot of Endwalker stuff when that releases here in about a month. Also, I've got links in the description below to my Twitch channel, my Twitter, and my Discord, if you want to give me a follow there and kind of know what we're doing all the time. With that said, I'll see everybody next time. Take care.